But I do have a lot of experience dealing with USDC and dealing with Circle. And also, I personally have worked in a lot of different types of blockchain related companies, both small, tiny, real startups, and also very large multinational corporations that are dipping their toe into blockchain. And Circle is obviously a very successful, hugely successful company. They want to see some liquidity and some demand for USDC, even if it's in the form of bridged USDC, and take that into their calculus when they're deciding which chains to issue, native USDC on. It's not a simple pay-to-play situation anymore. I really doubt it.
What is up, Ada Nation? Welcome to Dapp Central, your home for everything blockchain and crypto. As a part of today's highly anticipated interview, I'm going to be joined by Temujin Louis, the VP of Marketing for Wanchain. Now, over the course of the past couple of weeks, there's been tons of chatter about the adoption of USDC on Cardano in comparison to other potential homegrown stablecoins here on the network. And so Temujin has actually worked with Wanchain in order to bring USDC, USDT, and DAI, as well as a few other tokens onto Cardano. And we're going to talk about all of that as a part of today's update. So without any further ado, Tem, welcome aboard. How are you doing today?
Hi, Fareed. Thanks for having me. I am doing great.
Thank you for giving me some more of your time. We met in person in Dubai during the Cardano Summit, where we talked about Wanchain and everything that you guys are doing, not only for Cardano, but just for interoperability, right, moving forward. And so it's been a great chat so far, and I look forward to just kind of extending that conversation. And then, of course, touching on some of the hot topics here that have been gathering a lot of noise and a lot of chatter. I want to kind of, sift through that. And I think you're just the right person in order to help us do that. So let's maybe just kind of kick things off. For anybody who isn't familiar with Wanchain, can you speak a little bit about Wanchain and then talk a little bit about where you kind of fit into the equation?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity to introduce the project again. And I'll try to be quick so we can get to the topic of the day, which is USDC on Cardano. But Wanchain, for those of you who don't know, is an R&D focused blockchain interoperability project. We've been around for quite a long time. In many ways, we're kind of a cousin project to Cardano. We're from the same era. We officially launched in 2017. The roots stretch back a little bit further than that in the 2016 era. And from the start, we have had as our mission interoperability. We want to drive blockchain adoption by basically building bridges, interoperability solutions to connect the world's various blockchain networks so that they can operate as one single meta network. So Wanchain itself, if we are not the first, we are certainly one of the first blockchain interoperability projects, and we have a few milestones over the past several years. We are, in fact, the first decentralized public blockchain bridge to ever launch, and we have deployed the first ever Bitcoin to Ethereum direct bridge, and more recently we have newer innovations like NFT bridges, Xflows, which is our native to native cross-chain protocol, as well as a few other things like cross-chain messaging and the like. And more relevant to your viewers, last year we launched decentralized bridges connecting Cardano to, I think, 11 different networks. We started with blue chip assets like USDT, USDC, BTC, ETH, and DAI. And now that Cardano is part of our infrastructure, it's basically connected to more than 30 different networks. Right now, like I said, we started with 11 and some blue chip assets, but now that it's part of the infrastructure itself, it's an easy thing to just basically switch on bridges to these other networks as well.
Yeah, thanks for the nice and quick intro. I remember covering everything Wanchain when you guys had made the announcement that you guys would be integrating into Cardano. And as you mentioned, I think since then there's been additional integrations. But I want to just maybe focus on some of the bigger ones, right? Which include, as we see here, USDC, USDT, and DAI. So I think that will kind of shift us into some of the recent conversation around USDC released by Circle. So the first thing I have on the agenda is just to kind of talk a little bit about, what is the difference for somebody who's not aware, between native USDC and a bridged version of USDC handed out by a partner, for example, like Wanchain. Do you mind kind of explaining that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can divide USDC, if you'd like, into these two categories, native and bridged, if you'd like. native USDC simply means that it's issued directly by Circle and that that token is directly backed by a US dollar. So one USDC is backed by one US dollar. As of today, if I recall off the top of my head, I believe that Circle issues USDC on 15 different networks, both EVM and non-EVM. Bridged USDC, a little bit different. The thing that's backing it is not directly one US dollar, but it is in fact one native USDC. So native USDC backed by one US dollar, bridged USDC backed by one native USDC.
I appreciate that. And moving forward, I want to again keep the conversation centered around USDC. But there's been some questions and some concerns when comparing the native versus the bridged. I think the biggest thing comes back to security. So, do you mind talking maybe from a general standpoint and then also from a Wanchain specific standpoint as to what security measures are in place in order to make sure that you're always able to redeem that bridge version of USDC for its equivalent? And just to make sure also that I want to kind of address some of the concerns, I should say, that the community has with respect to security, focusing specifically on bridge assets. Do you mind just kind of explaining that as well?
Yeah, no problem. Obviously, especially in 2024, after the past year and a half, we've all seen, numerous blockchain bridges get hacked. We've seen the Nomad hack in the Cardano ecosystem specifically. So it's totally natural that it would be front of mind for everyone. But before I kind of get into the specifics of how Wanchain security work, I just want to say a few high-level things. These reflect my beliefs as well as Wanchain's beliefs, I'm sure. But we really don't think that interoperability and security are in conflict. Obviously, things need to be well designed. We always have to put security first. Things have to start with solid R&D. They have to be properly tested, and we need to develop industry-wide standards so that people outside of the protocol themselves can rigorously test these things as well. But interoperability is a must. If we're going to have mainstream adoption of blockchain technology, interoperability has to be part of it. We've all kind of experienced what it's like to be locked in one network or another and how difficult it can be for inexperienced users to even just figure out what's going on, to try to move assets from one chain to another. And so, interoperability is just something that has to be solved, point blank. Now, Wanchain, we've been around for a long time. We're the original cross-chain bridge. Up till now, we've not suffered any security incidents. And I think a big part of this is because we never will compromise security for growth. Never compromise security in the name of growth. This is just kind of something that's built into us. I think it's part of our DNA. It's because we're first and foremost an R&D company, and we take a really kind of academic approach to development, not unlike how Cardano itself was developed, I'd say. But to answer your question specifically about how Wanchain approaches security. So the Wanchain bridges are universal, meaning that it's essentially the same mechanism that secures the cross-chain bridges, regardless of which chains are involved. There's a bit of nuance there, of course. Some chains have smart contracts, some don't. So there's a bit of variance, but at a kind of high level, it's the same mechanism. And so Wanchain bridges, they are secured and powered by a permissionless group of bridge nodes. I say permissionless because there's no authorization needed to determine who can become a bridge node. You can become a bridge node right now. All of your listeners can go become a bridge node right now. And all these permissionless bridge nodes, they form what we just call the bridge node group. And this bridge node group gets reelected on a monthly cycle. So this is kind of the infrastructure of the cross-chain bridge itself. Now, the bridge nodes themselves, to execute these cross-chain transactions, they use a combination of what's called secure multi-party computation, as well as Shamir secret sharing. This is just a bit of cryptography, but to put it in kind of simple terms, unlike multi-sig, where you'll have X number of different private keys signing transactions, with MPC and Shamir secret sharing, the private key itself is essentially sharded, cut into small little pieces, generated by the various bridge nodes, and then reassembled. Once you cross a certain threshold, you're then able to jointly sign the cross-chain transactions. And there's a few advantages to this over multi-sig. We don't have to get kind of too technical right now, but basically What it means in layman's terms is that this private key that could essentially cause a lot of trouble if it ends up leaking never actually exists on a single device. So there's not this one, point of attack where a nefarious actor could kind of go and try to compromise the entire system.
Thank you for that insight there. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me personally is the fact that Wanchain has yet to fall and has little likelihood to fall to a potential hacker exploit. I think one of the biggest ones that came out, and it wasn't necessarily just a um, stablecoin issue, it impacted multiple tokens, was the Nomad bridge hack. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that moving forward. But that's really kind of been one of the biggest concerns that I've heard about when people talk about bridges in general. And again, it sounds like Wanchain has really prioritized that over growth, as you've mentioned, which I think is really important to note here for the viewers. And so there is a dedicated article breaking down Wanchain security. I'll go ahead and leave the link to that down below for anybody who's interested in finding out more about what Tem just kind of briefly highlighted. And of course, you can go into all the nuance and breaking down of how security is actually executed on the Wanchain platform. Let's keep things moving along, right? And let's talk a little bit more about Wanchain, and then we're going to focus specifically on USDC. So with Wanchain, you guys have now bridged over into Cardano. People are asking for USDC to come natively on Cardano when we already have something like Wanchain. Now, the thing is, people are assuming that the integration of USDC would automatically bring liquidity. That has yet to be proven. I know that USDC or Circle is working on an upgradable version or a transfer of like a partner's version of USDC to a native version of USDC. But in anticipation of that, what is Wanchain currently doing in order to, number one, get their name out there, and then number two, gain more adoption and usage of the actual USDC that you guys are bridging over on Cardano right now?
Sure, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. But first, I would just kind of clarify once again, Wanchain primarily we build infrastructure. Liquidity, ultimately is going to come from dApps and the Cardano community themselves. I want to just take a quick moment here and shout out one of the dApps, that has really been at the forefront of trying to build this liquidity on Cardano, and that's Liquid, the lending platform. They were very early adopters of these stable coins, and have experienced moderate success, attracting liquidity. But from Wanchain's perspective, we're in the business of building trust with these types of things. We totally understand, especially in a community like Cardano that has experienced the Nomad hack, that there's some work to be done to build trust amongst the community. So trust is not built quickly. It's not built in the short term. It's built in the long term. So we like to point out a few things. One, just how long we've been around. Like I mentioned a couple times already, we are the original cross-chain bridge, and we've not suffered any of these incidents that you've seen in other protocols. The second, the background of the development of the bridge itself is transparent and also pretty impressive. We worked hand in hand with like IOG and M Labs during the development of the bridge itself, and that's all been documented both on the IOG website, Essential Cardano, and these types of blogs. And then when the bridge did launch, we also turned to like an auditing firm that is from the Cardano community, that's already trusted by the Cardano community. So the Cardano bridge, has been audited by Anastasia Labs. And from there, we're trying to partner with other projects that we think are really solid contributors to the Cardano ecosystem. Most recently, we partnered with Maestro. So they are actually providing some of the infrastructure now, an Ogmios node to power the cross-chain bridge itself. And we also have a few other things to try to build more interoperability into Cardano itself. So right now we have a Catalyst proposal, just for example, to make it easier for users from other ecosystems to access Cardano's dApps and assets. In this case, we're proposing to build the capabilities to use MetaMask to interact directly with any Cardano dApp. So this is something that we're doing with Maestro. And it's really kind of all to integrate further into the Cardano community, engage with these various dApps, the different communities. You and I met in Dubai. We were attending a Cardano specific event. I myself spoke on a panel there to talk about interoperability. And it's really these kind of small things that we're hoping over time, going to add up to a little bit more trust, so people can feel comfortable bringing in that liquidity, because stablecoins especially, are really key to a vibrant DeFi ecosystem. And that's kind of one side, the trust building side. The other side, or I guess this would maybe a three-pronged thing. The second prong is that we're also giving interoperability capabilities to existing Cardano native tokens. So these are things like Hosky or Giro or Shards or Dean. These are just a few of the examples of Cardano native tokens that we've integrated into the bridge themselves, so they can kind of go and explore other ecosystems and ultimately attract users from Ethereum and Avalanche and Polygon, and make them aware about the good things that are happening on Cardano. And then there's just the pure co-marketing stuff, that's also part of the equation. For us, it's mostly in the form of giveaways, so we've done collaborations with some prominent protocols on Cardano. Liquid I mentioned already, but also Spectrum. We did stuff with Jed. We did stuff with Wing Riders, with A-Starter, a large number of them, to try to encourage and incentivize people to try out the bridge. That's really where we're focusing. We want to get people's hands on the bridge. They can experience it. It's an easy process, and just kind of take it away from the conceptual and let them just try it out, because this thing exists now. It is there. It can be used. You have one USDC. You can go try it out just to get a feel for it. And on that note, we are going to launch yet another giveaway later this week, actually, again with Liquid and Wing Riders, to try again to build some stable coin liquidity on Cardano.
Thank you for that. And I think there was on your end quite a bit to break down as well. I'll just kind of focus on some of the highlights, which to me was the fact that you guys are focusing on infrastructure, right? You guys are providing the tooling. It's up to the community to decide whether or not they want to use it. So I appreciate you clarifying that. Now, you also mentioned that you guys are focusing on interoperability, and I think your Catalyst proposal with Maestro is a clear example of that. So I actually did see that. I didn't get time to dive into it, but now that I'm hearing the short and skinny of it, I mean, this is an invaluable proposal, I think, for adoption and interoperability with the Ethereum ecosystem, the ability to be able to access a Cardano-based app utilizing one of the biggest wallets on ETH, which is MetaMask. So I'm going to give that one more time. I'll be digging around on that, and I'll probably release a specific dedicated video to highlight exactly how that's going to work and what the plan is. But I'm happy to hear that you're partnering up with Marvin Burton, head of Maestro, right, who I believe was the winner of the hackathon, as well as one other award in Dubai, which has really been contributing to infrastructure development here on Cardano as well. So two infrastructure powerhouses teaming up to bring Cardano to the masses. And I think Maestro was also on a separate proposal with the Maya protocol, which was to basically provide bridgeless swaps from other ecosystems into Cardano as well. So you guys, I think, are doing a really great work in making sure to interconnect Cardano with other networks. And of course, your guys' focus here on Cardano native tokens and stablecoins, et cetera. So let's jump into, now that we've kind of talked about, what Wanchain is, we've talked a little bit about native versus bridged assets, and we've talked a little bit about liquidity and interoperability. Let's kind of just jump into USDC specifically. The first thing I want to maybe just go ahead and talk about, is the fact that Circle, and I mentioned this earlier, is looking for potential candidates to launch native USDC. Now, they probably don't make that choice blindly, right? They need to have some sort of test or some sort of proof before actually making that move. If I'm not mistaken, there's been a couple of chains that actually launched with a bridged version of USDC that was then able to get that upgraded to a native version. Do you mind kind of breaking down how that works, potentially what Circle is looking for, again, because you're not working for Circle, but you have experience with stablecoins, touching on what it is that they might be looking for and how that process just kind of works overall, going from a bridged version of USDC on a chain and then upgrading that to a native version, which we could potentially see happening on Cardano, given the fact that you guys have done the legwork to bring a bridged version on Cardano.
Yeah, and right before I dive in, to clarify, even though you just said it again, it's important for your viewers to understand. I don't work for Circle. I work for Wanchain, but I do have a lot of experience dealing with USDC and dealing with Circle, and also, I personally have worked in a lot of different types of blockchain-related companies, both small, tiny, real startups, and also very large multinational corporations that are dipping their toe into blockchain. And Circle is obviously a very successful, hugely successful company. And these types of companies are risk averse. So they're not, like you said, going to go blindly and just issue USDC here and there without pretty much high confidence, let's say, that it's going to be a successful endeavor for them. And you can kind of see this in their public communication as well. So late last year, they published a blog post or an announcement that was outlining their bridged USDC standard. So, they see the need for bridged assets. Most of blockchain sees the needs for bridged assets, and it's about how you're going to deal with these. So the specific bridged USDC standard, it's basically outlining a path, that will dictate how a bridged USDC can become a native USDC. Basically, Circle would theoretically take over ownership of the smart contracts that are the bridged USDC. Now, this standard is only for EVM chains, but it can provide insight to how they're thinking about things. They want to see some liquidity and some demand for USDC, even if it's in the form of bridged USDC, and take that into their calculus when they're deciding which chains to issue native USDC on. It's not a simple pay-to-play situation anymore. I really doubt it. They themselves, talk about, they want to see not only the amount of bridged USDC on a chain, but also the growth rate over time to see that it is, gaining steam. Also, the number of dApps that are supporting the bridged USDC, and these are all things that they themselves are publicly saying that they'll take into consideration when deciding where to issue native USDC. But like I said, none of these things are guaranteed. This standard is for EVM chains only. Cardano, of course, is not a EVM chain, but it can give you insight into how a company like Circle is treating the decision-making process in terms of deciding where to issue native USDC. We have seen it play out also in the past. Various other chains have already done this type of transition, both using this standard and before the standard even occurred. So you were seeing a lot of things out there in the ecosystem that are showing that this is more than just empty promises or just going for a headline or anything like that. This is something that's being acted on actively by Circle when they are issuing USDC natively on different chains.
That is a really great point, and thank you for that answer. I had the opportunity to ask a question to Charles Hoskinson. What are we waiting on to get USDC on Cardano? And he mentioned some very clear facts. One of those facts was that it's not an engineering issue. If Circle wants to get USDC on Cardano, from an engineering standpoint, Cardano can accommodate. He also mentioned it's not a financial issue. If Circle's asking 10 million, 20 million, whatever the case is, there's ways for Cardano to come up with that money, whether it's through one of the founding arms or whether it's through, the treasury, something like the Intersect MBO, et cetera. It can happen. I think that those were the two biggest hurdles that people kind of focused on early on. And the fact that Charles was able to say, hey, it's not either of those only leaves, I think, one thing to me, which is what you just highlighted there, which is market demand prior to them actually coming on board and launching, right? Again, this is strictly speculation here on my end, but it could be that they're waiting to see, okay, well, there's already Bridge USDC on Cardano. If that's being used, okay, well, now we have more of a reason to come on there and make this full integration. But as you mentioned, right now, that bridging standard only applies to EVM chains. So it would potentially look like maybe something a little bit different because we wouldn't be going through the traditional bridge upgrade. But it might be that Circle's looking to see that demand prior to actually launching, given the fact that we have something like Wanchain already on. So I wanted to highlight that there. And I'm kind of curious as to what your thoughts are, with respect to the fact that, again, it's not necessarily an engineering issue or a financial issue. Again, strictly speculation as you have no direct correlations or connections to Circle to confirm or deny these things.
Yeah, about what you said about what Charles said in response to your question. Obviously he would know way more than me, but that makes perfect sense. I mean, there's no way it's an unsolvable engineering problem. Even for a project that is as relatively small as Wanchain, especially compared to Circle, there were changes that needed to be made to the Cardano mainnet itself to accommodate the bridge, and IOG was more than happy and very helpful in facilitating these changes. So if someone like Circle came in, you would expect, even more support than Wanchain got, and we got a lot. But in terms of the standard, I'm not really worried about that, because we've seen this transition happen on major Ethereum L2s and sidechains, even before the standard was outlined. The standard itself is probably to formalize something that was already happening, so that it doesn't have to be ad hoc every single time, so that there's a clear process. But just last year alone, Polygon as a side chain and Arbitrum, Optimism all got really popular as Ethereum L2s. And with L2s, there's an in-house bridge to bridge assets from the L1 to the L2, so from Ethereum to Optimism, for example. And whilst these are officially provided bridges, they're still bridges ultimately. What you end up with on the L2 is a wrapped token. You get a wrapped USDC. And these got really popular. Tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of liquidity floating around in all the Dapps. And Circle did come in, and they ultimately issued native USDC on those L2s. It was not, this was pre the standard, so there was no way to just hand over the existing contracts. So what happened is Circle just came in, issued a real USDC, a real native USDC, and then the previously bridged version was basically just renamed to USDC.E. And technically both exist hand in hand. You can see some fun stuff like a USDC.E and USDC stable pool, for example. But ultimately, I think everyone agrees it's better to have the native version of the asset. So over time, it'll just transition into full liquidity in the native version of the asset. So this is something that has happened multiple times in the past year. So it's reasonable to expect something similar could potentially happen in Cardano if there's enough demand that's shown there. There's no shortage of chains that want native USDC and native USDT. It's not like they're desperately looking for new places to do it. So it's reasonable for them to prioritize those chains that have already demonstrated, a high demand for this type of asset.
Again, I think that just kind of reiterates the what we need. I'm trying to think of the way to put this here. I think it shows that what we have with Wanchain could be that in to finally close the loop with Circle, right? Again, we already have USDC and USDT here from Wanchain. And so I'm personally going to push to, again, just kind of get Wanchain out into the masses. Obviously, you guys aren't paying me in order to do that. It's just, again, what I personally believe could be that last missing piece, which is the evidence that the Cardano community wants to actually get USDC on board, that they need to go ahead and utilize what we currently have. So I think, again, that's just my thought around that. I wanted to get your thoughts, which I do appreciate. You did touch on one thing that I want to jump into next, which is CCTP, right? Or the cross-chain protocol for USDC. For anybody who hasn't heard of CCTP, do you mind explaining what that is and the kind of role that it plays here in the USDC ecosystem?
Sure, yeah. I personally am a huge fan of CCTP, and I think it's a perfect fit for something like USDC. Um, for the layman audience, let's say, what it basically is the official Circle USDC bridge right now. What it allows is for native USDC to be burned on one chain and minted on another chain. It's not dissimilar to how bridges work, but because it's the official solution by Circle, they have access to the contracts that mint the real USDC. So it's kind of built in that way. But it really is just a mechanism that burns real USDC, real native USDC, and mints real native USDC on another chain. Wanchain itself, we've served as the launch partner for CCTP many times whenever they roll it out on a new chain, and we will continue to do so. I think I might have said it in passing earlier, but everyone prefers native USDC over a bridged version of USDC, certainly. And we have a lot of different cross-chain products, and they are suitable to support native USDC as well. And we will always prioritize it on a chain when the chain is there. But I think I've paid myself a lot of attention to the chatter on Cardano Twitter recently, and one thing that I do think is important to just clarify, because it is a lot to kind of research on your own if you're not, if you're just trying to catch up and haven't been paying attention as it's been developing. But CCTP in and of itself is not the same thing as native USDC. USDC is minted on something like 15 chains, but CCTP is only available right now on 7 or 8 chains. And you can expect, I'm sure, that CCTP will expand to other chains. It would be reasonable to expect, long-term vision is that all versions of native USDC will eventually support CCTP. And it's probably also reasonable to expect CCTP to be expanded to other Circle official products, like the Euro stablecoin. There's no reason why the Euro stablecoin, which is now also issued on multiple chains, can't benefit from CCTP. So CCTP is really just an official cross-chain mechanism. From Wanchain's perspective, we pay close attention to CCTP. Like I mentioned, we're launch partners. We integrate it into our own products. But beyond that, we really believe that there's a need for industry-wide standards before we can really reach true interoperability between different networks. And it's really, really good to see a major player like Circle also be thinking about how interoperability should work and throwing their hat in the ring. And who knows, maybe one day CCTP itself can be abstracted out a little bit, made a little bit more decentralized, and it itself could help inform the standards that we all end up using. That's probably a few years away, but it's not impossible, and it's something that we hope to see, if not specifically that, something like that come to fruition.
Thank you, Tim, for that breakdown. I'm still learning a lot of this, and it's really good to have you on here, giving us all of your knowledge and all of your expertise when it comes to this. And so as we get ready to kind of close things down, there's a couple of questions and concerns that I want to kind of get your perspective and take on as well. So let's kind of shift gears and talk about some of the challenges, right, that fiat-backed stablecoins tend to face. Right now on Cardano, we have algorithmic stablecoins. We've got over-collateral stablecoins, but a lot of people are itching for the first fiat-backed stablecoin to really come on board. So that said, USDC is fiat-backed. Without focusing specifically on them, can we maybe touch on some of the potential risk factors that fiat-backed stablecoins could face? Because again, I think people kind of tend to put them in a ranking of their own, and they kind of think, okay, well, if it's not bridged and it's fiat-backed, then there's like no risk involved in here at all, as opposed to something that is bridged, or as opposed to something that is algorithmically backed or potentially over collateralized. So, with respect to exploits, hacks, or just worst case scenarios regarding fiat-backed stablecoins, what can you kind of share?
Sure, yeah. I think the tricky part or the dangerous part with fiat-backed stablecoins is that you're dealing with the real world in a way that something like a bridge or an algorithmic stablecoin isn't. Those latter two are really engineering problems that need to be solved. Maybe algorithmic stablecoins, there's a few other factors, at play in terms of different mechanics. But regardless, when you're dealing with fiat-backed, you're dealing with the government. In that point, it's really about regulations and compliance, AML considerations, and these are huge risks. You would be unsurprised to hear that a government takes seriously those who are representing their fiat currency digitally. Now, here, personally, when I'm looking at different kind of fiat-backed stablecoins, I'm not looking too much really at the technical side of things. That part is relatively easy to solve and has been solved many times. Where I end up looking is how they're handling the on-off ramp, the on-off bridge, even. The piece of the puzzle that is the digital to the real backing asset. Bank accounts can be frozen. The basic flow, of course, is you have real USDC, maybe some papers in a bank account, and then you issue the digital asset based on this backing. But we've seen, even with large companies, even with Circle last year, was it 18 months ago, where some of their bank accounts ended up getting frozen. When you're a big company like Circle, who's already proven, or even Tether, you have multiple bank accounts in multiple jurisdictions, so you kind of spread the risk out. When you're just starting out, it's more difficult to immediately launch, with all these different jurisdictions, all these different banks, even probably difficult to immediately be in kind of a top tier bank. Anyone who started a blockchain company knows that it can be difficult to get banks to open accounts for blockchain related companies. And so this is kind of really where the risk goes. And beyond that, banks even can go under. We've seen that in the US many times. And, part of this is one of the reasons why a lot of us ended up in blockchain to begin with, because of a lack of trust for these kind of incumbent structures. And so something like a fiat backed stablecoin is in itself very reliant on these structures that a lot of us might already be a little bit wary of. And then there's just kind of boring off chain stuff, in terms of insurance and how this type of stuff works. Bank accounts usually, are not going to offer, 100% insurance on the funds in the account. There's regulations, that dictate what percentage of it is going to be insured. And it's very difficult to get third-party insurance that are going to cover crypto assets and or crypto-related assets. But no one's saying that it can't be done. Obviously, it's been proven it's done. Circle, Tether, extremely successful, and no one is saying that there aren't better ways to do it than they've done it. But I myself, most people listening, we're not, let's say, legal experts in this field per se. So when I look at these type of things, you look at the companies that were very successful, that have this track record, and look at how they did it. Again, it doesn't mean that it's the only way to do it, but it's a proven successful way to do it. So when you're evaluating a new project, if they're taking a different path, at least you have to ask, what are the reasons? It doesn't mean that it can't work, but this is a flag that requires investigation. Why is this different than the proven way? And what are the kind of downstream effects of this? What are the additional risks? These big companies that did it, I sincerely doubt that they haven't thought of these different ways to do it. We've even seen it in the past, when Circle was smaller. Just as one example, when they were starting out, they allowed retail investors to mint USDC themselves from a customer account. But they very quickly stopped that, only allowed their partners, institutional partners, to be the ones to mint the asset. It doesn't necessarily mean that this was a strict legal requirement, but there's something when they were looking at the landscape made them make that decision. And so, this is just something that's worth considering and thinking about. These huge companies, they're not stupid, and they're not out there trying to, screw the little guy necessarily. But there's reasons behind their decisions. And so these are just things worth thinking about.
This is why I like to have you on, Tim. You are a bucket of knowledge. What a wonderful response here. I just want to kind of recap some of those points. Some of the risks with fiat-backed stablecoins, even though a lot of us tend to think that they're not as risky, do include, right, the fact that their assets, right, which are managed by the banks, could potentially be frozen. As you highlighted as well, insurance, right? The entire funds within the reserve may not be insured, to where even if you get something back, it's not everything that you maybe had in there. And then very lastly, banks are no strangers to collapses, right, with SVB going down. And I think that actually caused a pretty big scare and a potential depeg of, I think it was USDC, or it might have been USDT. I can't remember which one. But those are just some of the things there. Now, one of the things that also comes up in my videos in terms of comments, is the Oracle side of things as well. So, any blockchain should have some sort of oracle that they can rely on to get, that real world data with respect to the amount that's in the reserves, and then be able to pass that on in a clear and transparent way on chain, right? To make sure that there's no additional tokens minted on chain, or that there's not more minted on chain than there is backing it in the reserves. And so we've actually seen a couple of hiccups here on Cardano, which really kind of brought this to the tip of my mind, right? Is that we need more than one oracle or third party to be able to verify these reserves and bring those values on chain. And so I do appreciate that. I think the next thing, and as we get ready to close, I want to talk about just two last things. And I think you actually touched on one of them just now, and that was the minting policy. Again, just full speculation here because you don't have the insights. But with respect to the minting, right? There's platforms that will air to allow for anybody to mint. But as you mentioned, Circle tried that early on, and they basically have stopped that. So I believe you have to have, or you have to meet some sort of criteria in order to be able to mint directly with Circle. Why do you think it is that they don't want the average Joe just going onto their platform and minting USDC and maybe burning it whenever they feel like it, as opposed to going to somebody who's somewhat of a trusted distributor of USDC?
Yeah, I mean, pure speculation, of course. For me, I would have to think there's probably two major factors. First, operationally, it's got to be a complete headache. If you have just approved partners, they're issuing at scale. You'll probably have some pretty serious KYC or KYB procedures in place, and then you only have to manage these relationships, with a manageable number of partners. If you allow the retail investor in doing tiny amounts, it's just a lot of overhead, a lot of things to keep track of. And I think the second thing, again, pure speculation, it's related to AML. Individual KYC procedures. We hear these three-letter acronyms, KYC, KYB, but these are not singular things. There's everything is gray. There's different severities and procedures to complete KYC. And if you're a business, for example, it might be a little more intense than if you're just an individual. But if you're having kind of money coming in and being minted from 10,000 different directions, there's a lot of potential here for obfuscation, for different type of money laundering risks. Of course, you're going to have procedures in place to try to catch it, but it's just a numbers game at the end. If you have 100,000 things that you need to secure versus just 10 things that you need to secure, probably more easier for your business to just secure the 10. But again, pure speculation off the cuff. That's probably how I think about it. I doubt it's a very clear law that says you can't. Certainly not. Anyone who's been paying attention to the industry, one of the major issues is that none of the laws are clear yet. So everyone is kind of just guessing based on their experiences. But based on my experiences, it would be related to either the cost of operations and concerns and difficulties relating to AML.
Then I tend to think that makes perfect sense, right? Reducing overhead and then also reducing risk. So yeah, I think those are really good points that you make there. Again, as we speculate on why Circle doesn't necessarily allow anybody to mint their fiat-backed stablecoin. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, and this I think has been one of the biggest points here with the conversation about bringing USDC and Cardano, the freezing mechanism. What are your thoughts surrounding this? Is this a necessary evil in a sense? Is this for regulatory compliance? What are the benefits as well as potential drawbacks? And just where do you stand with Circle's freezing mechanisms, or just any freezing mechanism with the fiat-backed stablecoin?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, us Web3 natives, if we want to call it that, definitely these type of freezing mechanisms are kind of counter to the philosophy underlying blockchain and decentralized systems. But with these fiat-backed stablecoins, you're already talking about centralized products. Whether or not there's a freezing mechanism in place, there's still going to be that on-off chain component, that bridge, when you're transferring from the digital realm to the real world asset. This part is by its nature centralized. So it's not quite the quote unquote like perversion of a purely decentralized system that is now no longer pure because it has a locking mechanism. It's already a centralized system that has an additional safeguard in it. I think, we'd love to live in a world where it wouldn't be necessary, but if we want, mainstream adoption of blockchain technology, it's necessary. Again, it's going to be related to compliance, certainly. And again, probably not, I'm sure there's no specific clear law that says that these stable coins must have locking mechanisms right now, because there's just not a huge set of very clear laws pertaining to stable coins at all. But when we look at the two biggest players, they both have it. They have, again, they don't make these decisions willy-nilly. They have legal compliance teams that are, have surely made the recommendation, if not the requirement, that these things need to be in place. And secondly, we've seen the news, the headlines whenever there's hacks and things like that. Government agencies do reach out to these protocols directly and ask them to freeze these assets. So at least on the compliance and regulatory side, the agencies responsible for that themselves are leveraging this function. And I'd imagine that those that do have that function in place are more likely to be allowed to continue to operate, versus one that, even if is not the intention, enables money laundering or at least obfuscation of funds because there is no such mechanism to freeze an illicit actor.
Again, great points made. I tend to think that when people hear about the freezing mechanisms, they think of the worst case scenario where some of these entities that have the power to freeze the assets are abusing that power in an incorrect way, right? Where they're freezing funds for little to no reasons. But with what I'm hearing you mention, it sounds like it actually could be used for good in the event that there is an exploit. Now, again, nobody's banking on an exploit happening or on, the government's needing to freeze assets that may have been used, for money laundering, et cetera. But in the event that they would need to do that, it seems like that's when those features would actually come in handy. So I think, again, with the community, it's maybe a matter of education, but then also making sure to provide the right oversight to make sure that the people that do have the power to freeze assets aren't abusing that and freezing things unnecessarily or prematurely. So I think it's like a fine middle ground that we have to kind of walk between, because I can see the positive aspects of it. Imagine being able to have frozen assets immediately after the Nomad Bridge hack and being able to, identify and make sure that the people that had those assets couldn't actually bank on those and actually capitalize on those assets, right? As opposed to an environment where you don't have any freezing whatsoever and people can steal those assets and actually use them and therefore basically make away with those assets. Interesting piece that you raised there, Tem. We're at the 46-minute mark. I'm sure you've got a long day ahead of you. I want to just pose you one last question. Is there anything that you want to share with the community that we haven't talked about or that you think is key, whether it's relating to USDC or Wanchain?
Sure. I think maybe I just leave everyone with a parting note. Wanchain believes in the potential of the Cardano ecosystem. If we didn't, we would not have built this infrastructure to allow assets from other ecosystems to come into Cardano. So we really do want to see the ecosystem thrive. We ourselves, pride ourselves on building interoperability between chains that are not EVM. Of course, we support EVM as well, but only having an EVM to EVM type of world, that's not our long-term vision. We believe in lots of different types of blockchains that can serve specific purposes, have their own unique sets of strengths and weaknesses. But these themselves, will still need to be able to be interoperable with one another if we really want the world to run on blockchain, and we do, and we're working towards that and playing our small part in trying to build that future. And the last thing I'll say is, we're going to be involved in the Cardano community for the long run. You're going to see me and other members of my team at various events online, popping up on interviews like this, even just to share our thoughts and speculations about the topics of the day that might not even specifically be about Wanchain. We really see a bright future for Cardano and are excited to play our part.
Ladies and gentlemen, Temujin Louis, VP of Marketing for the Wanchain Bridge. Again, awesome to have you on here, not just to highlight how Wanchain is different, but also to kind of talk about the topic of the day, which has been USDC and stablecoins here on Cardano. If you guys would like to find out more about Wanchain, make sure to go ahead and check out the description down below. I'll leave the links to all their socials and their official website. And then I'll be providing more content and just tutorials surrounding how to actually utilize the bridge. Again, I think it's on us here within the Cardano community to show some of these bigger players, right? Whether that's Circle or Tether, that if we want them to come and play ball with us, that we're willing to play ball with the funds, not the funds, but the platforms, and the tokens that we already have in the ecosystem. And so That said, if you guys enjoyed today's video, I would appreciate you guys if you guys could smash that thumbs up. If it's your first time stopping by Dapp Central and you appreciate content like this, talking about some of the infrastructure providers and builders here on Cardano, consider subscribing. And last but not least, if you have any questions surrounding Wanchain, their security, USDC, or any of the topics that we've touched on as a part of today's video, then make sure to go ahead and leave those down below. And Tem, I look forward to having you on the channel in the near future. Again, it's been a wonderful time, and I wish you a wonderful day ahead. Everybody, take care. Bye-bye.